unlike most slashers, Scream features multiple different killers in each of its movies. Actually, as of Scream 6, there have been a total of 11 Ghostface killers, 13 if you include the 2 additional killers at the start of the 6th film. Regardless, with so many Ghostface killers out there, the question then becomes, who is the best Ghostface? Well, in today's episode, I'm going to rank every single Ghostface killer from worst to best. Oh, and this should be pretty obvious, but there will be massive spoilers regarding every Scream movie, so you've been warned. Anyway, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel if you like horror movies. Also, be sure to leave a like on today's video if you enjoyed today's topic. But with that out of the way, this is Nerd Space Horror with my rankings of every single Ghostface killer. Let's get it. Number 11, Jason and Greg, Scream 6. We start off today's list with an entry that includes 2 killers in the same spot. While I don't think Greg actually killed anybody, Jason was responsible for killing Samara Weaving's character at the start of the newest entry of the franchise. Yet, in a franchise's first, the Ghostface killer revealed himself immediately after the opening kill. As both Jason and Greg were part of Tara's new friend group, obviously they plan on being the new Ghostface killers. Unfortunately for them, they never had the chance. The real Ghostface killers of Scream 6 caught onto their plan and had plans of their own for Sam and Tara. Therefore, Greg was killed off screen and Jason became the real opening kill of the movie. Since they never really got to do their thing, Jason and Greg obviously find themselves at the bottom of today's list. Number 10, Detective Bailey, Quinn, and Ethan, Scream 6. Judging by their placement, you would probably assume that I didn't like Scream 6. However, I actually thought it was a pretty decent follow-up to Scream 5. The only issue that I had with this film came from the final act. Brutal kills, interesting characters set during Halloween, and a unique new location never explored fully before in a Scream movie made this film a lot of fun to watch. Unfortunately, after the reveal of the Ghostface killers, the rest of the film falls flat. My first issue with these 3 being the killers is that it completely steals from Wes Craven's vision of Scream 2. Obviously, the boyfriend did it has been used multiple times in whodunit slashers, including Scream 5, but the family of the previous killer being the Ghostface killers is a little on the nose with Scream 2. There were some shiny moments though. The fake out with Quinn was a nice touch, and having 3 killers, 5 if you include the opening sequence, was something that has never been done before in the franchise. But even these changes aren't enough to make any of Richie's family stick out in the slightest. At least not enough to earn any of them a higher spot than any other killer of the franchise outside of the ones they killed themselves in the opening of this movie. Number 9, Charlie Walker, Scream 4. Most of the Ghostface killers of the franchise have pretty solid motives. Whether it's revenge, their love for the stab movies, or just because they want to be famous, most of their motives are pretty unique from each other. However, out of all of the killers of the franchise, Charlie's motive might be the weakest. He literally became a Ghostface killer because he got manipulated by Jill. Not that love is a bad motivator, but using the motive that he was blinded by love in a relationship that only started after Trevor cheated on Jill was something that really didn't stand out as creative or as interesting as other killer motives. It also doesn't help that Charlie was pretty much played by Jill. Despite being a hardcore movie fan and knowing every little aspect of the stab movies, he still couldn't figure out that there had to be some sort of plan for a second killer alongside Trevor. Yet he still went along with the plan because he was blinded by love, and therefore, despite his horror movie knowledge, he let Jill pull a fast one over him. Number 8, Roman Bridger, Scream 3. Unfortunately, Scream 3 is probably my least favorite of the franchise, and when I think about why, most of it comes back to the Ghostface killer, Roman Bridger. His MO, his backstory, his reveal, and just about everything relating to Bridger played a major part as to why Scream 3 was the worst film of the franchise in my opinion. However, Roman does stand out from most of the other killers as he's the only one that doesn't have a partner. What this means is that Roman actually did all of the kills in Scream 3, therefore he's technically the Ghostface with the highest kill count. Yet this isn't enough to elevate his position on this list any higher than it already is, thanks to the negatives that follow Roman. First off, he sort of messed with the motives of the original movie's killers. Billy Loomis and Stu Macher were a fantastic Ghostface killer duo, and they are both kind of hard to compete with. But as Sidney Prescott herself says, don't fuck with the original. In Scream 3, we learn that Roman is actually responsible for informing Billy of why his mother left him. Plus, apparently Roman was the one that gave Billy the idea of how he could get revenge. Basically, Roman's backstory is that Billy and Stu didn't come up with anything on their own basically, and that it was all technically his doing, which kind of pisses me off honestly. Sure, the motive of being Sidney's secret brother is interesting, but not enough to save him as a character. Then when you add in a voice changer that can mimic other characters' voices, the movie gets a little crazy and farther from the traditional Scream movie. Roman Bridger might be the most brutal killer of the franchise, as he's the only one to break double digits almost as a Ghostface killer, but he's far from the best in my own personal opinion. Number 7, Richie Kirsch, Scream 5. Never trust the love interest. Dewey said it himself the moment we met Richie, and he was spot on. Actually, I think a lot of us caught on to the fact that Richie was probably going to be one of the killers, but that doesn't make him a bad Ghostface, just a slightly more predictable one. Richie's motive was actually one of my favorite motives, in which he actually shares with his partner Amber. That is of course being the fact that he's obsessed with the Stab movies and he wants to save the franchise. Because of the direction that Stab 8 heads down, both Richie and Amber look to reboot the franchise. However, they take a page out of previous killers like Billy, Stu, and Jill, in which they want to be the only survivors to carry on the franchise. In fact, their MO was so in line with the requel mentality that they went after characters related to the original victims and killers of the first film. Richie was a more methodical killer, as it appeared that he always went for the neck. The only reason he doesn't make it higher up on today's list comes from the fact that his turn isn't as iconic as some of the other killers on today's list. Number 6, Mickey, Scream 2. Out of all the Ghostface killers, there's an argument that could be made that Mickey is kind of the craziest of them all. I mean, fun fact, he's the only one that actually wanted to get caught. He had no intention of getting away with his crimes. All Mickey wanted to do was to be famous for the killings, and then he wanted to head into the trial where he could blame the movies for why he did it. Portrayed by Timothy Olyphant, the guy has one of the best turns as well. Seriously, he's up there with the greatest of all times in terms of his final act reveal. And outside of Roman, who was a solo killer in the third film, Mickey actually has the highest kill count of the franchise. A big reason for that comes from the fact that his partner was an older woman, Billy's mother. Because of that, Mickey had to do all of the heavy lifting and essentially became the muscle of the duo, as he was the one that killed every single person in the movie with the exception of Randy, who was killed by Mrs. Loomis, as she admitted as much in the final act of the film. And yeah, unfortunately, he gets turned on by his partner just like Jill betrayed Charlie, but at least he wasn't as naive as Charlie was. He was willing to take credit for all the murders, so honestly, I can see why he would be fooled into thinking that Mrs. Loomis wouldn't betray him. The only thing that really holds him back from moving up on today's list comes from two things. One, despite being a movie buff, he isn't the mastermind of the pair. As he was the muscle of the two, Mrs. Loomis did all of the planning and preparing, whereas Mickey just went here and did this and went there and killed this person. The second thing that kind of holds him back comes from the fact that Mickey sort of takes a lot of the traits that he has from his predecessor, Stu Macher, the psychic killer that is completely psycho in the final act, but doesn't contribute much in terms of the strategy, is exactly why Mickey fails to surpass other characters above him. Number 5, Amber, Scream 5. Here's some trivia for you guys. Up until now, every single sidekick killer found themselves lower on the list than their mastermind partner. That's usually because when you look at each group of killers, the mastermind tends to be the more interesting and methodical of the Ghostface killers in each movie. They usually have the better motive and they usually have the better final act presentation. But with that being said, I feel like there's a solid argument that makes Amber a slightly better Ghostface killer than the mastermind and her partner, Richie. Don't get me wrong, I really enjoy Jack Quaid's turn from caring boyfriend to psychopathic killer. But honestly, part of me felt like Amber did it better. Sure, her reveal sort of took a lot of inspiration from Billy's reveal when she shot Liv, revealing herself as the killer to the group, but she still had a pretty terrifying alter ego as the killer. She kind of reminded me of Stu in some cases, as she was completely off the rails and over the top, which honestly, those kind of killers tend to win me over more in the final act. Plus, unlike most psychic killers, it seemed like both Richie and Amber were hardcore fans of the Stab franchise, and there's a strong possibility that they came up with a lot of the plans and strategies together, which is quite different from the other Ghostface teams, as usually there's one strategic mastermind while the other is sort of the crazy partner or the brute force of the team. Another key point to Amber and Richie's partnership is that they were pretty much on the same page constantly. Usually in the final act of each film, the killers start becoming frustrated with each other and in some cases even betray each other. Mrs. Loomis shoots Mickey, Jill kills Charlie, and even Billy visibly becomes annoyed and frustrated with Stu in the final act. Yet Amber and Richie are pretty much on par with each other throughout the entire final act, as it's revealed that they actually do love each other. The main reason why I do rank Amber a few spots higher than Richie, though, comes from two factors. One, she does most of the killing in Scream 5. Again, that doesn't automatically make a killer higher than their partner, but it does play a key factor when they are also splitting the mastermind role 50-50. However, the bigger factor comes from the fact that Amber, to this day, remains the only person of the franchise to kill one of the three legacy characters. R.I.P. Dewey. Plus, by looking at her technique versus Richie's, it's highly likely that she's the one that killed another previous survivor of a Scream movie in Judy Hicks. Between having the more savage technique of twisting the knife into her victims, splitting the mastermind role with Richie, and the fact that she kills a legacy character, Amber easily cracks the top 5 of best Ghostface killers in the Scream franchise. Number 4, Mrs. Loomis, Scream 2. So fun fact, the original Scream 2 killers weren't supposed to be Mickey and Mrs. Loomis. In the original script, it was going to be Derek, Sydney's love interest again, and Holly, her best friend. However, during production of Scream 2, the identity of the Ghostface killers were leaked and the plan had to be changed, which made Mickey and Mrs. Loomis as the killers. Despite that though, Mrs. Loomis remains as probably the most unexpected Ghostface killer of the franchise. In a series that combines the whodunit genre with the slasher movies, surprisingly, most of the films are usually pretty predictable. But the same argument can't be made for Mrs. Loomis, as her reveal was a double twist. Firstly, we didn't notice at the time, but Mrs. Loomis actively avoided Sydney throughout the film. That's because Sydney knew what Mrs. Loomis looked like thanks to her being Billy's girlfriend. On top of that, Mrs. Loomis wasn't a part of the friend group, and as most movies would reveal in the final act, the killers are usually part of the friend group. So, as Debbie Salt, her character was able to avoid any suspicion throughout the film. Now, when it comes to the kills, unfortunately, Mrs. Loomis didn't get her hands dirty much. But honestly, that's a testament to her character on its own. She was the mastermind, and most of the time, she was the one that was on the phone with the victims while Mickey did the killing as the muscle. She managed to convince a random film student to help her commit murder and even got him to agree to take the blame for it all, though she still chose to not take that chance and betrayed him anyway. And while she didn't do most of the killings, the one kill that she did do was both the most impactful and most brutal of them all, as she killed fan favorite and survivor of the original massacre, Brandy Meeks. She made one thing very clear in the final act: don't fuck with her son, even though she did kind of leave him. Overall, Mrs. Loomis was a clever Ghostface killer that was able to keep her identity a secret throughout most of the film as the mother of Billy Loomis, and she was able to come up with most of the strategies involving the second Scream movie. The only thing that really holds her back from moving higher up on today's list is the lack of kills on her resume and the fact that she was barely in a movie. Yeah, it's impressive that she was able to avoid Sydney throughout the film, and her minimal role in the film made it hard to predict her as one of the killers, but that same trait is also a negative, as it didn't give us a lot of time with her character, and it kind of felt like a cheap play to go with a killer that's barely in the film. Number 3, Stu Macher, Scream. Obviously, Stu Macher isn't exactly the most intelligent or the best Ghostface killer, but he's definitely one of my personal favorites thanks to Matthew Lillard's portrayal of him. His personality makes him stand out more than any other killer on today's list. The dude has one of the best turns of the franchise. During the final act of Scream, Stu becomes a complete lunatic. Well, more of a lunatic than he already was. Billy may have been the mastermind, but Stu was definitely the comedic relief of the duo. Even after Sydney escapes from the two, Stu continues to laugh and enjoy every minute until his dying breath. One of my favorite moments is when Sydney asks Stu why he went along with Billy's plan, and Stu comes up with one of the best answers ever: peer pressure.
Hello?
Oh, Stu, what's your motive? Billy's got one, the police are on their way. What are you gonna tell them?
Peer pressure.
Clearly, Stu is just messed up in the head, and truthfully, he has no real motivation outside of just wanting to kill people. His motive is the most basic of the franchise, yet it's one that makes him intimidating and dangerous. Sometimes, the motive of not having a motive outside of just loving to kill people is the most terrifying motive of all. Michael Myers and Norman Bates are two perfect examples of this, one of which was even used as an example by Billy himself. Number 2, Jill Roberts, Scream 4. Scream 4 gets a lot of heat for some of the decisions that it made, but honestly, I think it's one of the better entries of the series. Scream 4 included more kills, more brutality, and by far one of the most intelligent Ghostface killers of the franchise, Jill Roberts. As the cousin of Sidney Prescott, Jill Roberts was used to living under the shadow of her more famous celebrity relative. Because of this, Jill became obsessed with making herself the new Scream Queen of the Stab franchise by becoming the sole survivor of the next generation of Ghostface killings. She seduced Charlie, her partner, into assisting her with the killings, and then, when she thought she didn't need him anymore, she killed him. She managed to perfectly frame her ex-boyfriend for the crimes, while also setting herself up as a victim by literally beating the shit out of herself. And honestly, she almost got away with it, but unfortunately she made two mistakes. One was the fact that she didn't make sure Sidney was dead before putting herself in the hospital. However, her biggest mistake was actually letting it slip that she knew about Gail's knife wound to Dewey. Had she been slightly more careful, she could have gotten away with everything, making her the only Ghostface survivor of the franchise. Number 1, Billy Loomis, Scream. It's really hard to compete with the original mastermind, Billy Loomis. While Stu was obviously the comedic relief and the less serious of the two, Billy was the more calculated and more dangerous Ghostface. I mean, every moment that Billy was on screen, even before his reveal, was filled with tense moments of anxiety thanks to his dark and brooding personality. From the get-go, Billy Loomis was prime suspect number 1 throughout the movie, and during the final act, we saw him become a psychopath. Hell, he even quoted Norman Bates from Psycho. Yet what really sets Billy apart from every other killer on this list is what he manages to accomplish, and how close he came to getting away with everything. Whereas Joe Roberts probably had the best plan and almost got away with it, Billy and Stu, thanks to Billy's plan, actually did get away with murder for almost a full year. Don't forget, Billy and Stu were responsible for killing Maureen, Sydney's mother, and even managed to frame Cottonberry for the crimes. And as much as I love Stu, clearly Billy was the mastermind here, and he was obviously responsible for coming up with a plan that allowed them to get away with it and frame Cotton. From there, they managed to create a plan to frame Sydney's father for the Ghostface killings a whole year later, and they almost got away with that too. Actually, Stu is probably the main reason why they didn't get away with it, considering that he was supposed to be watching Sydney while Billy handled Dewey and Gale. Overall, Billy is one of the smartest masterminds of the series, and when you add in the fact that he's one of the most menacing and brutal killers of the series, it's clear to see why he earns the title of Best Ghostface Killer. Well, that's it for today's episode of Nerd Space Games. Hit up the comments and let me know what you think of my list. Is Billy Loomis the best Ghostface killer of the franchise, or is there someone out there that you think deserves that title more? Let me know down below. Anyway, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel if you like the content that I bring you guys. Also, leave a like in today's video if you enjoyed today's topic. But thanks for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Nerd Space Horror. Take care.